This video is brought to you by Blessed Be God Boutique, maker of Catholic fashionable apparel, handmade accessories, and more.
You know, people sometimes like to talk about media being used to prepare people for big changes that are coming. Whether that's real in the secular world or not is something people are free to debate if they like. But in the Catholic world, it absolutely certainly is true. There is definitely this sense that the powers that control certain Catholic media outlets, these church forces like the highly corrupt Jesuits and Vatican-friendly wealthy donors and the rest, are preparing the church in America to be made synodal, to implement Francis's weird vision for a new synodal church. And there are few cheerleaders for Francis's program in general. More high profile, the Cardinal Cupich, the Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, who hit retirement age earlier this year, but is still running Chicago for the foreseeable future until Francis promotes him or accepts his resignation, whenever that happens. Cupich has, frankly, delusions of grandeur about synodality. You're about to hear him talk about how this is a wonderful inflection point for the church that future generations will look back upon and remember as this great moment when the church was revitalized. That talk should sound familiar. That's the exact same talk we were given, or our grandparents were given at this point, 60 years ago in the waning days of Vatican II. That it was a new springtime in the church. The church would be revitalized. It was opening its windows to let in some fresh air, and the future generations would look back fondly and remember how great Vatican II was. And while certainly some people believe that today, the data does not lie. Vatican II was an unmitigated disaster for the church. Synodality will probably be that, but worse. But Cardinal Cupich gave an interview to American Magazine, and he is pushing hard for the U.S. bishops to implement Francis's vision of synodality, and this is part of that campaign for it. This interview was given and published just before the bishops' big meeting in Baltimore. That's the key context here. And the result of that meeting in Baltimore was that the U.S. bishops have agreed to the creation of a task force for the implementation of Francis's synodal vision for the church. Big changes are coming to your parish, to your diocese, whether you like them or not. So we go to American Magazine for this headline. Cardinal Cupich, the final synod document is not a landing strip, it's a launching pad. Now don't forget a key element here. It does not feature anywhere in this article or in this video except when I mention him here, and that's Father James Martin, S.J. He is the editor-at-large of American Magazine. He was a participant at the synod and would post on X about what was happening there, within the rules of the synod itself about speaking publicly about the synod and its happenings. His job has been to push his program for the church in America. He's part of Francis's propaganda team for the United States, speaking directly to the laity and to priests. That's what his job is. Also remember that Cardinal Cupich, McElroy, and Tobin were the cardinals at the synod who came to the USCCB meeting and convinced their brother bishops to implement a task force for the implementation of Francis's synodal agenda in the church in America, as well as, of course, having had a very public meeting with Pope Francis that was supposed to be private in nature and not on the papal schedule for the day, but they made sure everybody saw that this meeting was happening. And after that meeting, what did we learn? That Cupich, McElroy, and Tobin had spoken about the state of the U.S. bishops and how there needed to be more bishops open-minded in the United States, and that the plan for Francis was, moving forward, to put Bergoglian bishops in dioceses in the United States. All this means that the program here for Cupich is to remake Catholicism into the synodal religion that Francis, Fernandez, Hollerich, and all these other villains in Rome have been promoting rather openly. Once you understand all that, this makes more sense. From the article, quote, "The synod's final document is not a landing strip, it's a launch pad. We are just beginning. We have no idea how this is going to unfold. This is why it's historic. That is what Cardinal Blaise Cupich, the Archbishop of Chicago, told America's Vatican correspondent on Sunday afternoon, October 27th, the day the Synod on Synodality concluded with a solemn Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, presided over by Pope Francis. In this interview, given at the North American College in Rome, where he had studied and where he resided during the Synod, the Cardinal said, "The documents of the Second Vatican Council are coming to life, with the Synod in its final document." He added, "I spoke to the young college students from America who visited Rome during the Synod, and I told them that they are going to look back and see this is one of the most historic moments in their lives, for it has redirected the focus of where the Church is going. I believe that it's a historic moment in the life of the Church that is going to be celebrated in history." End quote. That is a delusion of grandeur. I do think when we look back a few years from now, as this Synod, we will see the Synod as a major inflection point in the battle for the heart and soul of Catholicism, and I think there's no doubt about that. Whether we'll see the failures of the Synod as a moment when the tide was turned and we began the restoration of some semblance of sanity in the Church, or on the other side of the coin, if we'll look back and see that this was when the ape of the Church was truly born, that remains to be seen. But in that much, Cupich is right. This will be remembered years from now by Catholics today witnessing it. I just don't think he understands how the Synod is viewed by the typical layperson who views the whole thing with general disinterest, and how diabolical this whole inversion of the Church's hierarchy and its understanding of authority truly is. This cannot be a moment of great, awakening or whatever for the Church, because you cannot invert the hierarchy as ordained by Christ into its opposite. It is an inversion by the Vatican's own admission of the hierarchy and its understanding of the hierarchy as it stands now. But this part really stood out to me, and it features some classic Francis-style gaslighting. The decentralization theme of the Synod is something Cupich is thrilled with, and they keep tying this back to Vatican II for some legitimacy, when in reality, linking this to Vatican II just confirms everything hardline traditionalists have been saying about the Synod and about Vatican II for years. The Synod on Synodality is meant to be essentially a Vatican III. Quote, "The final document also refers to the role of the bishop, and the bishop vis-a-vis the diocese, his priests, consecrated women and men, lay people, other bishops, and the Pope." This is a question being posed to Cardinal Cupich, where he is asked if he could summarize what he has seen come out of the document. To which Cupich responds, "The documents of the Second Vatican Council are coming to life. Many of the things said in this final Synod document are already rooted in what the Second Vatican Council said about the role of a bishop. I noticed that yesterday the Holy Father spoke about himself as the Bishop of Rome. That's how he sees himself primarily in terms of his service to the Church, and how he relates to the rest of the hierarchy throughout the world. He's a diocesan bishop. It's been said before that synodality is bringing the council to life, and I think the Synod did this in regard to the understanding of the role of bishops." End quote. Francis does not see himself as a mere diocesan bishop. Bishop of Rome is one of his titles, but he certainly does not see himself as merely a diocesan bishop. If that was the case, he would not be laicizing priests far away from Rome for denying that he was actually Pope. He would not be dropping the hammer on Tyler, Texas's Latin Mass offerings if he was merely a diocesan bishop in Italy. He certainly sees himself as much more than that. He is actively trying to crush any resistance to his reforms of the Church, using means that when more traditionally minded popes had done so in the past, they became the examples of what popes should not be doing in the minds of modernist reformers, and are used as a great example of what they think the Church should avoid in the future. I'm going to give you an example. Pope St. Pius X famously dealt with somebody who had been resisting his attempts to strengthen the actual faith in the Church by taking and removing him from being an archbishop and reducing him to being a diocesan priest at a meeting. Did it unilaterally without bothering to ask for anybody's input. And in my mind, that is perfectly within the realm of being a pope. And yet, the future popes afterwards would look back on that as a moment when the authority of bishops and their own apostolic lineage needed to be treated with greater respect. And it highly influenced Vatican II 50-something years later. Keep that in mind when you hear Francis is allegedly looking at himself as merely a diocesan bishop. When you see the way he uses papal authority, Understand that Francis does not merely see himself as a diocesan bishop, as merely the Bishop of Rome. He is something else. He understands that. Or at least the world accepts him as something much more than a diocesan bishop. But in that statement, you do see what the modernists want. They want the papacy reduced to a symbolic role. We saw that with the Reform on the Papacy document issued in the summer by the Vatican. And we heard some talk of that from the synod itself. So I'm curious, though, do you think Cupich is right that this will be seen as a great moment of breathing new life into the church and all the rest of it? Or do you think he's only half right, that, yeah, we'll remember the synod, but we won't remember it fondly? That future generations of Catholics will see this as either the point when the tide began to turn against modernism, or as the time when the ape of the church began to manifest itself without shame. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. So like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So to sharing this on social media, that helps a lot too. And if you've ever thought about supporting the work of Return to Tradition, now is a great time. Your support does help keep these daily messages coming. Links in the description box to Patreon, Subscribestar, and other options that have been asked for by supporters of this channel, as well as that join button below. Thanks very much. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.